Hey everybody. Today I will probably be talking about Ardour, but I've been thinking about some stuff, just a bunch of random stuff, and so I might have a rant about audio stuff, but I don't know. We'll just see. We'll just see how stuff goes here. So I guess let me first get started with Ardour, and then we'll see where things go. So let me make sure I'm switching over here okay. Yep, that looks good, I think. Alright, so... Oops, wrong one. Cool, it looks like everything is imported here. That's great. So yeah, just a little bit of context. We are continuing my thing where I mix Aquawizard stuff in various audio workstations, and today we have Ardour 8. So here's a little bit about Ardour 8, the drop. I don't have the very latest one, but this is a pretty recent one, 2023 or so. And yeah, it is an open source and basically free digital audio workstation. However, they don't make it very easy to get it directly for free. They really want you to donate to the project, which I respect. So, yeah, it's a little bit more tricky to actually acquire the software, but if you're dedicated enough and you really want to support this open source, I mean, you can download the source code for free and try to compile it yourself, but nobody does that. They just, I mean, maybe some people do it, I don't know, but anyway, just I'll close this. And so yeah, what I've gone ahead and done is just start a new session. Should make sure I save in case it crashes. I haven't really... Ardour doesn't really crash nowadays. Way back in the day, like well over a decade ago, it really depended on your system and all of the particulars, but nowadays, like, I just fired this thing up. Don't think it'll crash. That's not my modern, relevant, or recent experience with it. But yeah, just want to throw that out there. But yeah, you got your basic edit window, and you got your mix window. It's a lot like Pro Tools, but it also kind of diverged from the recent Pro Tools. Like, when I say recent, like the last 10 years of Pro Tools. It was kind of more like Pro Tools from the mid 2000s, and then kind of diverged, I feel like. It just kind of became its own thing, and it's much more well developed than something like Audacity, but because they have all of the features that you would expect from something like Pro Tools, it's a lot more complicated than Audacity. So it makes sense that it's not as popular as Audacity, even if, you know, it's basically... You can make a very small donation to the project if you wanted to, and get the full version. It's not like they tier it, or at least I haven't experienced that. But I think you do have to have an operating system that they've compiled it for, which they used to not have an easy way to get the Windows version unless you got a particular version of Ardour that was made for, like, a mixing console company. I don't really remember all the details, but yeah, but nowadays I think it's a lot easier to get all of the stuff, and it seems to work pretty stable, and I don't even have, like, the newest Mac system. Here's just a little bit about this Mac. Yeah. It's a 2017 i7. It's got 16 gig. I did go in for the extra memory, which was... Yeah, I don't know if I'll keep buying Mac stuff because it's just so darn expensive. It's like, oh, the base model always seems like it's like right on that threshold of affordability. And you're like, but I need... At the time, I was like, maybe I just need a lot of memory and that would help. And it does, but I also... I don't know, maybe more internal disk storage space or something like that would have been pretty cool. But anyway, So yeah, Ardour, it's running. Trying to remember the key commands. They are completely different than anything you've ever used, so I'm going to be stumbling around a little bit. Also, the menu is not very Mac-like. It's very Linux-like, where if you've used Linux stuff, like for example, let me just show the file browser. Yeah, it just refers to root, and it just literally takes you to your root. Yeah. So here's the folder that I made for Aquawizard practice. I just imported the files, let them kind of sit where they were instead of copying them. That sped up the process a lot. And yeah, it does just kind of read, your basic PCM audio file formats, WAV and AIF natively. It also does like open source formats. It can export to compressed formats from what I remember. Yeah, and like I said, it's got the typical audio mixer views. It has these very handy side things that let you see the things in a handy way. I like that. They're very simple. They load fast. I always like fast interfaces, and it's a pretty fast interface. It's got the transport. It's got like every transport thing you could possibly ever think of, which I like, but at the same time, because it's like a Linux environment, it's like you can do everything. It's a little overwhelming. So I'm trying to remember the difference between punch in and out versus punch in and punch out. And I'm sure I could pick it up real fast, but it's just those little things. I always like the auto return function. But I'd have to remember what stationary playhead means, for example. But that's like any software. You just have to learn, okay, what are all the quirks for it? And this one has particular quirks, sure. But yeah, you just have to figure that out. The edit window is pretty familiar. You got your copy and paste. You got your way more select options than you could possibly think of. I should mention the key commands that are built in are like the Ardour key commands, but you can load up your preferences, and it's somewhere. I don't really remember, but yeah, this is very similar to when we were looking at Audacity in a previous video, and I was looking for the mixbus the entire video, which turns out there was none, which is fine. And I was like starting to mention in that video, and I never actually said, here's what you do in this situation when you don't have a mixbus in your audio environment. Basically, just give yourself headroom, mix so that you don't mix too much, so that you're clipping off and distorting your audio. So don't make the level too high. And then what you can do is import that audio back into the software, and then you can process that audio further, because it's very handy to have a mix bus. So let me kind of point that out here in Ardour, just to kind of familiarize ourselves a little bit more. Yeah, we've got our individual tracks here. Each track has an audio recording. Just to make sure, just to catch everybody up here. Each track has an audio recording that was done simultaneously of a rock band called Aquawizard. And I'll remember this key command eventually, but so that's what all these tracks are. But then you have a mixbus track. I think that's what I'm going to call it from now on. Often in software, it's called the master track, but I think that can be a little bit confusing, especially if you have different... This is what I don't like about that. If you have like different workstations and you're trying to communicate, like, I'll send you my master mix or whatever, like, I'll send you the master mix, that can get confused with your master mix or the house master mix. Like if you're working backstage doing monitor world type stuff, like I'm trying to open open your mind to the possibility that the thing that you are working on is just one part of a larger thing. So I like the term mixbus because what it's referring to is you're getting your particular faders mixed to one easy thing that is passed along in the production chain. So it just depends on if you're like, your production is working on one, you're working on the one production and then that's it. Or you might just be working on one part of it and passing it along. So also the term master is also usually used in conjunction with the term slave. And that's useful when you're trying to make it very clear that you have this hierarchy, but those are not really good. They're not even really an accurate description of how those systems work. So I just feel like phasing out that kind of language is actually very useful because it's more like, I don't want to get into like network theory or anything like that, but it's like most stuff does not actually follow the implications of that. So it's like, why do we even use this language? So anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. I have a different rant for later about stuff, but let me do the fun stuff first, and then it'll be like a content sandwich. Fun stuff, rant stuff, and then maybe I can think of a way to wrap it up. That'll be fun. So I don't know. I'll just play this like I've been doing, just a proof of audio concept routing. Okay, there's yes, that's that sounds really good. In a bad way. It's bad, but in a good way, but in a bad way, you know what I mean? I think the audio all came in okay. Just Brad was kind of starting off in a different headspace, I think. So let's start chipping away at this. I'm trying to think. Okay, I think it's Control M is the switchy guy, which is unfortunate because on my keyboard, Control and M are on like opposite ends of the keyboard. And this doesn't seem to be working, the cycle through Windows key command. So it's very, see, this is not normally how the Mac window mini, whatever this is. This is not usually how that's set up in Mac. So it's a very Linuxy kind of thing, like I mentioned. Might as well expand that out. But yeah, I'll have to use both hands to switch for now. I can reach with one hand. It's just a little extra motion there. Okay, so let me just have a start point here. And I'm just going to play and get a rough, raw mix going. I think I was playing the wrong thing too, and just all around rough beginning there. That's okay though. Okay, so I've been starting with the kick. How about I start like, I don't know, somewhere else. I'll start with my guitar playing. Oh yeah. Just kind of, oh, amp simulator. Empty. Oh. AU distortion. Those are tags. Okay. Trying to review what plugins we have here, what audio plugins we have available to us. Audio units are loaded in the special Linux type. There are Lua plugins. Those are like Lua scripts that I could learn more about someday, but then there's like Linux, virtual, I don't know what that stands, LV2. They're in here. The Ardour team has some basic stuff built in.
Oh, okay, cool.
Harrison Calls. I think these are demos. I'm being completely surrounded by my cats because they.
We are Aquawizard. This is Aquawizard, the band. Go to aquawizard.band to learn more about that.
I think these are demo plugins here. I can't really see because a cat is in the way. Oh yeah, I talked in a previous video. I called it Ozone, but I meant to call it Isotope.
Couple songs. This is Seahorsing Around, and then the next one up after that is Coraline.
So I'm not really sure. I'm gonna maybe kind of fake the guitar amp experience. So maybe you would start out with like a bit of natural saturation. I don't know. Let me just solo my guitar here. And we're just gonna load a preset. I don't know. Basic saturation. Let's just do something basic. Don't make it too complicated. Sure. Okay. Right click to add new plugin. Let's add an EQ. Try not to breathe in here too much. Even more saturation, why not? Okay, so I wonder if they have a preset for like an amp. They have like acoustic guitar. I don't know. Heavy guitar. That didn't do anything. Actually, not that bad. Yeah, why not? E-guitar. Oh my god. Oh, jeez. You know what? Why not? I think this will work. I'm just gonna crank the shit out of this. You know what? That works. That's good enough. I don't care. I'm gonna try to copy these. I think I can do this. Like this. Oop, put it in the wrong spot. That's okay. I move the fader down. Yes, I can. Okay. Equalizer. Put this over on Brad's guitar here. Pull the fader down. Hey, you know what? That's better than nothing. I don't have an amp simulator, so I'm building one. In case I didn't mention that. You know what? That's gonna work, I think. Let me skip to a song where there are clean guitar. Zoom way out here. There we go. Let me get a nice compression thing going on here. Favorites here, just using the Milda basic compressor. Yeah, I'm just going to Mastertown, or Mastertown. Damn it, I was just at a rant about not using that word, and it's right here, and that's popped in my head. Using Preset Town here, that's what I meant to say. They don't have an electric guitar. preset. Overdrive. What's that do? Nothing. Oh god, it really does overdrive it. Okay. Whew. Nope. Just, I'll tune it to myself. Alright, we're gonna squish it kind of a bit. Add some fast compression here. Pull this down. Pull it way down. Is it auto gaining? Seems like it's auto gaining. It's definitely auto gaining. Why is it doing that? Oh, maximize. Okay, don't do that. There we go. Whew. Alright, bring the threshold way the hell down. A lot. That means a lot. Alright, then we'll bring this up a lot. Okay, that's pretty good. I don't know. It's good enough. Copy this up. There we go. Now I gotta set the, that's gonna be way too... There we go. Doesn't need as much, lift. Actually, you know what? I can, compress just a little bit more. Just because this level does vary a little bit. Well, so does mine. Okay. Let's go back. Cool. I like that. Some direct bass here. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing to Andrew's bass. Nope. It's a little slow, the graphics. That's okay. Move the fader. So what I'm doing here is changing the order of the plugins. Something I like about Ardour is it's visually very clear on the routing from one plugin to the next, and then it goes to the fader, which is this guy down here, and then you can put it to different effects after the fader. That's what the PFL and AFL buttons on mixers, that's what it's talking about. So Ardour's like, that's freaking confusing. Let's just graphically show the order that everything happens in. So there you go. There's little Ardour facts. I do have to change this equalization, but I did want to slap this compressor in here real quick, and I did not mean to do whatever this is. Alright, bass town. I really want to get down deep, nasty with it. There we go. Some compression there. Alright, let's bridge. There. That's better. Alright, let's hear one of the rockin' songs here. That's not bad. Just jumping around. Alright, I'd say for not having amp simulators, that's not sounding too bad. Let's do the same thing with the drums. Alright, this is a good chunk of time here. It's just a lot of kick drum. Alright. Go to the kick channel here. Let's start with some good EQ. Settings. I'm going to turn off this normalizer because it bugs the heck out of me. That's much calmer. Alright, I'm just going to turn up the saturation. Just do it. I'm going to duck the 700 hertz range. You can always hear a little bit of artifacting with oh, you gotta turn on the band. Set what kind of high pass you want. And then I think you can get it to resonate. Yep, there we go. Let's resonate this. Go down here at the 50 hertz range. 60, 50, whatever. A little below 60. I'm about 55-ish. There we go. Good enough. Boop. Well, usually what I like to do is start to boost it, and then I'm like, well, really, I kind of want this to be a low shelf. Close. There we go. And then I'm just going to kind of boost this range here. I usually like the sound of that. And it doesn't have to resonate so much. Still can, but heck, maybe even duck that range right there just a little bit. Okay, I'm going over the max. Not allowed to be louder than this. Breaking the rules. Oops, that's fine. And then why not add just a little boost right there? Why not? Cool. Alright, we got plenty of frequencies here. Let's get them super consistent. Maybe even screw them up a little bit. With a compressor. Very fast detection. Signal detection fast, and then what you do about the signal, not so fast. Let some of those peaks through. I don't know. Just friggin' do some stuff. There he goes. Kind of hard to see how fast it's responding, but oh well. Sounds good, I think. Let me turn it up. Maybe I want some more headroom. So I don't really need to turn it up. All right. That's fine. All right, classic EQ and compressor. Doing all the heavy lifting. That's what it sounds like without it. That's just the EQ. And there's the compressor to just kind of keep everything consistent, keep the levels, you know, at a good spot. So something to note the individual channels here are using a peak meter, and they have plus 6 dB, or 6 dB of meter extra headroom, and you can also very clearly see that it's post fader, which means it comes after. So they could, if they wanted to, they could put like the meter here in the signal chain and tell you where exactly this meter is measuring the level. But yeah, by default, it just gives it a peak, and it does plus 6 because the mixing is 32-bit. So 32-bit is usually floating point and precision, or I don't actually remember how it all works, but what I try to remember about it is usually in 32-bit world, you set your digital maximum such that it's really 24-bit, and then all of those extra bits are for the extra stuff above what you would have recorded at 24-bit. I don't know if the math lines up perfectly, but it's basically, if you record at 32-bit, most of the time, unless you're using all of the bits, most of the time you're leaving your bits unused because it's all digital headroom. And so audio workstations have kind of accounted for this, and they're like, we'll show you digital signals that are plus 6, the reference level of your otherwise would be 24-bit audio. I might have to double check my facts on that, but just don't make a clip. So that's how, Ardour's real good about that. It'll tell you, red, like over here, my vocal mic was over, so it turned red, and that was like literally this 0, but it actually passed the signal to the mixbus or master bus or whatever. And now if we look over here, we can see this meter over here. It looks a little bit different. For some reason I had it set to VU. I'm looking over here and I'm like, I don't understand what is happening. But if you right click on it, you can see, there's a lot of different other settings here, and you can also see not only is this post fader, it's actually the output of the channel, and you can even go custom. I don't even know. I think this means if you set custom, it does show you the meter positioning, which is pretty neat. Okay, so that's the thing. Just a second ago, I was like, I wonder if you can do this. Anyway, so so since it's your mix bus, you want to meter is the very last thing, so you make sure you're looking at what you're actually going to be mixing down to the stupid audio file. All of the other channels were set to peak plus 6, but I think by default it was actually set to K20/RMS. And you might be wondering, like, what the heck does that mean? It's not really that complicated. It's just standard loudness measurement, and then I guess there's like a sub meter of your RMS, root mean square. All standard audio, pro audio stuff, big audio man terms. They talk about this stuff like it's biblical fact. So as we can see here, what was this again? K20 over RMS? Or is it K20/RMS? I'm sure it says something in the documentation, but it sure looks like over here that it's trying to show me two things. Like there's a dot and then there's a bar, and so this is confusing because you might assume that K20 is the dot and the bar is RMS, but I can tell you right now this is not the case, because this kick drum is peaking at, like, I guess -4-ish. And then so this is showing a peak at -6. I'm not sure why it's 3 dB down. I think that might have to do with the pan law, but I won't worry about that. Anyway, and then, so yeah, this dot is like consistently hitting up here. And then this meter is like 20 down. So what I think what's going on here is this K20 is referring to the reference value and the fact that it's using a K-weighted meter, which means that it's a loudness unit, basically. They're basically the same thing. K-weighted metering and loudness units are Sorry, I'm like hitting the microphone out of, desperation or something. But anyway, yeah, so anyway, in a K20 system, the 0 would be your loudness target, and then that plus 20 would be like your loudness headroom. Like that would be like, here's some extra room in case part of your thing gets loud. It can be louder up to about 20. It can be about 20 louder before it's like impossibly louder. They can't go much louder than that. So I think this is where I'm probably going to go ahead and just start my rant. I'm just going to stop talking here because I'm just kind of at the mixbus here, and I'm just kind of frustrated because it's like it's K20, which is a loudness unit, and then the /RMS thing is very confusing because it seems to imply, just play that audio again. It seems to imply like one is K20 and the other is RMS, when I can tell you for a fact it's only really showing you K20 loudness units on the bar here, and then this is like a peak meter. I'm like pretty sure. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure since 6 dB down from 20 is about where it's peaking, which would be like 14. So, anyway, so let's go ahead and switch over to my notes about my rant that I wanted to. I wasn't really sure when to start talking about this, but I think there will always. This is my rant on why there will always be confusion on audio levels. You ever notice how? You may not, but if you work in the media world, it just always seems like the audio people are in their own special corner and they're talking their own language, and video people are just like always goofing up audio levels, and there's always like extra noise that the audio people are like, you should have had this, blah, blah, blah. And so everyone hates each other. That's not necessarily how it always goes. I'm just saying, like, have you ever noticed a situation when people are just kind of confused? And that can happen in just about every time that I work on a project where I need to communicate some audio stuff. It just kind of feels like everyone's kind of picked it up on their own, and it's like, yeah, I know that there's like a standard, but I don't really know what the standard is. And so they're just kind of there's a general gnashing of teeth and just sort of, I don't know. So I thought I would prepare this rant for the general bemusement or the general, amusement of whoever wants to listen to this. So the first point, I've only got 5 points here. I want to keep this kind of simple because I could go on and on and on about it because it's a confusing topic. So there's confusion. I don't want to add to the confusion, but I don't have a good solution, so I don't want to make it more confusing. So I think the more that I talk about the recursive nature of how, going over a confusing topic to see if you can kind of unconfusify it, but you just end up making it more confusing, is inherently maybe a futile thing to do. But, maybe sometimes just kind of like digging into the details of something, you might not ever learn anything productive or something that you would actually use in your real life. But sometimes it just gets your brain thinking in a certain way that maybe is... Anyway, so we'll just kind of start on the first one. The medium through which audio exists can be confusing. So it's audio and sound. So I should maybe through which sound and audio, because sound and audio are actually two different things, and they're two different media through which they propagate. So sound is the physical manifestation of what we perceive to be sound. Audio is the signal representation of that sound. So sound, like our brain doesn't actually hear sound. It hears like an electrochemical representation. I don't understand our ears very well, but basically that the signals that come off our ears based on the sound that happens in the real world is then processed by our brain, and then our brain somehow puts that into a meaningful thing that most of us, I guess, kind of rely on. But if you don't have the ability to hear, that can be kind of like, oh, I got to figure out a different way to interact with the world like this. So I don't know very much about that, but the audio end of things it's just confusing. So in the air, sound are pressure waves, and then our ears, we just covered that. What microphones do is transduction, and so that is converting variations in air pressure using little physical, they're like little electromechanical there, I think. And then those electromechanical devices produce certain kinds of signals in response to those air pressure changes. And those electrical signals are very sensitive. They're very teeny tiny in the world of voltage. So if you think of like 120 volts coming out of your electrical socket, that's huge compared to the size of the voltage that comes out of a microphone like the one I'm using here. So those tiny signals then go to stuff like audio interfaces that plug into computers, or maybe it goes to like a mixing board or something. But honestly, nowadays we just use audio interfaces in computers, or like, stuff that's on your phone. So these electrical signals are usually start off in the form of what are called analog electrical signals, which are confusing. So anyway, those are then sampled to produce a different kind of electrical signal, usually is like a symbol, which is then kind of converted to like a digital thing. Or there's a lot of different ways you can do this, so I don't want to get bogged into the details. So, and then computers, usually we have just digital media. So there's like all these like details in here. And so what's easiest is if we just kind of are like, what, screw all that. Or if you're going to a different type of media, like tape, like analog tape, is this whole different audio interface for that. And it uses magnets. And so we won't even talk about that because it's, most people like digital because it's easy to copy. You don't degrade over time as long as you keep the media. So if you have like lots of backups of it, it usually works out. But often if there are errors, you can't recover them. But you build in error correction into the digital media and all that stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about that. I just wanted to point out how confusing all of the media are. And that's not even what I'm trying to rant about. I'm trying to rant about all the different audio levels that might interact between those media. And usually the jerk thing to say is, well, just make sure you got plenty of headroom. And so, but then you're like, well, what does that even mean? Headroom? Like room for your head that's kind of what they mean when they say headroom. But I think the way that it's been encoded into the audio profession is it's almost like a rite of passage to be like, do you understand headroom? Oh, you don't understand headroom the way that I understand headroom. So obviously you're not a seasoned professional, even though your stuff sounds great and sounds just fine. So it's not actually all that helpful, and it's confusing. I don't even have any research in here. I have just a bunch of questions. What does it mean? Once you kind of know what it means, how much headroom do you need? And Why are you giving me a recommendation that's different than with the thing that I read on Wikipedia? And which, how many headrooms? Should I have like a head house full of rooms? And are you talking about like the peak, or are you talking about like room for the peak if there's not like currently peaking, but you want to leave room in case there's more peaking later? And why are you yelling at me about this? Is this meter that I'm looking at, is it even a peak meter? What kind of thing am I? It's so confusing. So I don't have any good advice there. But you start looking at a meter and you'll be like, I kind of see what's going on here. You got these like negative, very low numbers, and that means quiet. And then if you got really big numbers, that's pretty loud. And red, if you can see the color red versus green, it's like the traffic light thing, It's like, this is useful for most of the population, but if you can't see the difference between red and green, just good luck. But let's get some kick drum in here. This is a long section of nothing happening. There we go. So usually a good place to start in the digital world is just knowing that the very maximum thing that you can encode into a digital sample usually is represented by 0 dB, and then it's all negative from there. So that's kind of a handy reference point, because you can have like 16-bit audio, which is used in like CD players. You can have 24-bit audio, which are used in DVD and professional audio stuff. You can have 32-bit audio, and that's what I was referring to earlier, where often you use 32-bit audio in a float method, which might refer to the arithmetic, or it's referring to where the audio lives inside of all of the bits that are available for a given sample. So if you think of a sample in time and how many bits could fit into that 32-bit float, that 0 reference point really just refers to, this is maybe about 24 bits. I don't actually know where that is, like I mentioned earlier. And then the rest of it is extra bits, just in case your signal does go up into that area. You still have a digital representation of what that signal is. And that's kind of the idea. So you have this extra headroom, me using the language there, to allow that to happen. But then as you get closer and you look at the meters and you're like, what's this value that's being used to sample this? And it is the decibel. And you're like, what is a decibel? Why do we use decibel? Well, the decibel is confusing. The reason you might use the decibel, I don't know if having the kick drum in the background is entertaining or what, but just a continuation of this rant here. Again, my theme here is just, it's all confusing. It's okay. So I don't even really know where to begin, but yeah, I was about to say something about the decibel can be handy, because if you're working with like a very large scale of numbers, you can basically squish that big linear scale or a logarithmic. You can just take this bit, like, so when I say a logarithmic scale, is basically saying like, sometimes I have lots of little values and sometimes I have lots of values that are huge compared to those tiny values. And maybe I want a scale that is between 0 and 100, where the 0 values are your tiny, insignificant values, and your 100 values are your huge values. Could there be a scale that's like that? That's basically what the decibel is trying to do. And I think it does an okay job for sound pressure level, but it does a really terrible job for everything else. So if maybe we start with sound pressure level, things make a lot more sense, where 0 dB in terms of sound pressure level is basically like a room that is like an anechoic chamber, which is a room that's like acoustically treated so that if sound occurs in that room, it gets absorbed and no sound from the outside can get in. It's basically pure silence. I don't know if that's the literal definition, so don't quote me on that, but that's basically the idea, is like 0 dB is so quiet you can't even hear how quiet it is. It is so quiet. So it's sort of this reference value there. Like 30 dB is considered like a normal noisy room, like not even noise, just like your AC isn't even on or something like that. So that's 30 dB of just noise floor zone in the sound pressure level world. And 30 dB is kind of a lot. Like we mentioned, 1 dB. 1 dB is not very much. 100 dB is a ton. And using the dB, the decibel scale, allows you to say, 1 dB increment up. And that's the same difference as, 199 dB, that the difference between there. That's the same amount of difference. Just in a logarithmic scale. So, duh, of course you would know what that is. So in terms of sound pressure level, the overall range that we ever need to work with is like maybe up to 130 dB, which is like it's like a jet taking off while you're listening to the loudest rock concert ever. This will hurt your ears. I wrote down one of these. This is from Wikipedia, I'll just be honest. Wrote down one of these. Sound pressure level, 120 dB, can cause instantaneous hearing loss, like when it's right at your ear. So that's kind of your reference. So like 100 dB is maybe as loud as you ever need things to happen. I think around 80 to 90 dB is the international recommendation for limiting your exposure to that amount of sound pressure level. So over like an amount of time, like a couple hours. So you don't really want to be exposed to more than like 85 dB over the course of like an hour or two. So that's generally around where rock concerts are tuned to, but that really depends on how close are you to the speakers, how close are you to the sound source. The closer you are physically in space to a sound source, logarithmically, the more you will... And that's why it's extra confusing, and that's why we use the decibels. So you might be walking toward a sound source, and it will increase in decibels linearly. It's like 1 dB as I have my distance, or maybe like 6 dB louder as I have my distance between me and the sound source. So it's just like, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to use too many examples and then give a false example and add to the confusion, because it's already confusing. And the deeper you go into it, and the more you mix up different things, is this a linear or a log? If you just you just want to get an impression of what's going on here. I don't need to go into the details. I'm sure there are more trained and people with a better memory for this kind of stuff than me, just being like, he's introducing it all wrong. But I don't care. This is my rant about how everything's confusing. It doesn't have to be confusing, but something that doesn't help with the confusion is if you are comparing a power value, the decibel is defined as 10 times the, base 10 log of the ratio of what you're comparing. So if you have a power level 100 watts compared to 10 watts, you can convert that to a power decibel ratio, value. And when you do it with a power value, you multiply this by 10. If you do it with a root power amplitude, you multiply it by 20. Obviously. Because a root power amplitude is obviously not the same as that. It comes down to do you remember your mathematics and everything and how logs work, and the ratios are just different, But the reason So it's already confusing because math. And for some people, math is like, no, it's not confusing. It's actually very helpful, and it keeps me sane looking at the world and just being like, yep, 1 + 1 still equals 2. It's great. But the confusion that happens here is suddenly decibels, start getting thrown around, and really only the most professional of the pros really remember this, is that a 3 dB increase or decrease is a doubling or halving of power values like watts. So if I'm saying like I just doubled my power, I could say I increased my power by 3 dB. But if you're talking about an amplitude and you say, oh, I just doubled my amplitude, that is a 6 dB increase. Or I just halved my amplitude, that's a 6 dB decrease. It's just confusing. I'm never going to remember this. It's a completely arbitrary scale, and we have to remember the different scales. And the other thing that's confusing about decibels is like you can have a decibel value and you don't have to even know what the reference value is for it. So like so that's why you have different decibels that have different units attached to the decibel. So you have a dBu, a dBV, dB full scale. They're all trying to be helpful, but they're not being helpful because you don't always know what the reference value is. So it's confusing. You got to look it up in a table. If you don't really know, if you have to like do some serious conversion and everything is in dB. The important thing with dB, though, is that it is all relative. There are some standards that have been set, but the idea behind it is that you compare relative values, because all these different systems like use slightly different voltages and they have slightly different power characteristics and all this crap. And then the other thing that doesn't help is how measuring levels is sometimes done with the peak value of the level of a sample, and sometimes it's done with the RMS value. And the difference being the peak value is sort of like the maximum sample, like the maximum value of your sample. But depending on what your domain is and what you're sampling, it's going to depend on how you define what that peak value is. Because what ends up happening in signals is these extremely high peaks can happen, and they'll happen in between your sample points. So if you don't sample this like extreme value, you're like, did that affect my signal? Like, how did it affect my signal? The Nyquist theorem does say that if you're sampling fast enough, you will represent that signal. But at the same time, you're like, but what, how is it, how is it all kind of getting in there? So, and how exactly are we sampling it? So the peak value of stuff can be very confusing. The digital world is very good at working with peak value because it actually can say, this is what I'm sampling. This is how often I'm taking a sample of the signal. And this is exactly the digital maximum value that I can represent. And here's the maximum value that is in the signal sample, all that stuff. So digital is usually pretty good with peak. But then as we'll see, there's this whole other thing called true peak that accounts for intersampling. And it's questionable as to whether you can even perceive it, but it's interesting that it does, depending on if you're doing true peak or not, it does affect the way that you process the signal, and it could potentially affect the way that it interacts with other systems. So true peak's almost like a condom for audio, where it's like, just in case any of this digital audio interacts with the system that might be able to reproduce levels, but blah, blah, blah. So should a system that works with non-intersampled processed audio, should it add some headroom for, fuck it, I don't know. RMS. It's It's like an average. Root means square. You take the square root, get the average, and then you square that. It's fine. The other thing that's annoying is sometimes values are represented peak to peak rather than just absolute peak. Sometimes you just have to know. It could be twice as big randomly. And then all of this is just for signal sampling. It's not... Signals do not necessarily follow human perception. So you have to think about, like, oh, how are we processing the audio? Are we weighting it? What are the different standards for these? Just use the loudness unit. Who cares? And then this is a whole different thing. Like quote-unquote pro audio systems use different standards than consumer audio systems. Most computers are consumer audio systems. And so trying to plug in a pro device to it causes headache and confusion and heartbreak. It's certainly possible, but it's just another level of confusion. And so there you go. There's my rant. I don't have any conclusions or anything like that, but now when we go over here and we see all these options for the meter, now I think we have a little bit of a appreciation for the madness that's happening here. Notably here we have an RMS plus peak meter. I actually kind of like this. As we can see, the little dot is there to tell us here's where we're peaking out, and then we have the RMS value down here. And if we convert it to the K-weighted meter with the target at 20, negative 20, or also known as a loudness meter with the target at negative 20, we can see that our loudness is floating just below a target value of negative 20. And our peak is well below what it would cause any problems. So, okay, this actually is a continuation of my rant, because here we have some extra confusing things on the internet that I'm just going to call out. I'm just calling them out. So on the headroom, I went to the headroom page on Wikipedia, and this is all just bullshit. It's just arbitrary shit. It doesn't do a good... There's some references, but not real. There's only one reference, and it's... Sound on Sound is a good magazine, but I wouldn't base my entire reference section on one article that takes this from... I think this is some company, I don't remember, but Lindos. It's like a measurement sampling system, and it's trying to give some like standards for headroom, which there are none. So I guess it's just a starting point, man. Like, it's no big deal. But this chart, it just gives some implications in this chart about this idea of an alignment level. In this sort of arbitrary, like 9 dB below the nominal level. Let me go ahead and just turn off Ardour here. And the reason that this kind of stuff sort of matters, and the reason that I want to rant about it a little bit, is because a lot of literature and stuff really just sort of gives the impression that this is like biblical scripture for audio believists. If you believe in audio, you must know the levels, and the levels are a secret ancient text that no one can possibly understand, and only the greatest engineers of our generation could possibly begin to understand. Which might kind of actually be true, because there's so many components to audio that I can't even begin to get into. But I think just that in and of itself should give you an idea of, like, since there's so many variables to audio, there's so many different moments that can happen, so many different sounds that people and instruments can make, you really are signing yourself up for pain and unnecessary use of energy if you try to follow these things too closely. I think what I want to just what you get out of this section, I suppose, is like maybe some guidelines, but overall just kind of being like, what's actually important. What's really important is knowing if you're distorting or not. The red stuff does not in this chart. Okay, so let me explain this chart just a little bit. The red means, yes, that's definitely distortion. You should not, it's not available for your audio because it's just full of distortion and it's not a faithful reproduction of your audio. On the other end is gray noise, and noise is just all of the noise that there is, all of the stuff that's interference, non-ideal representation of quiet audio sounds because it's too noisy. Like you can hear me talk and there's like a little bit of noise in the background that kind of gets turned down when I stop talking. That's noise. Your green here is your normal range of audio, and that is not defined here at all. But a normal range of audio, I suppose, is where your audio signal is. That's already where this chart is a little bit deceiving, which I'll keep talking and explain. And then your headroom is supposed to be this little yellow area. It's the area between this arbitrary point here and your distortion. That's your headroom. Arbitrary point, and then where is it going to distort? But that's actually not really what that's not always what headroom refers to. Because it's headroom in reference to the normal range above the noise, below the distortion point, the nominal distortion for a given system. And basically what I'm trying to say here is there is no magical alignment point or alignment level. There's sort of like a ballpark, but as soon as you start kind of like assuming that this is how it always works, I think you just kind of, I don't know. So breaking this down a little bit further, here's the live sound dynamic range that's possible. This I agree with. This is a good chart. I like this part of the chart. Live sound, about 35 dB sound pressure level. Yes, that's correct. That's about where stuff starts getting noisy. It's just noise. It's just the sound of wind, the sound of atoms bouncing around inside of stuff. I don't know. That's real quiet. Then you got your green range. So it goes green all the way up to 100 sound pressure level. Again, earlier I was referring to like 85, 90. Don't want to do this for too long. So I guess they kind of set this level, 100 dB sound pressure level. This is totally arbitrary. But I guess they set it for, if you're at a loud rock concert, this is maybe the loudest point in the rock concert that there will be. Now the question is that an average level, or is that like a short-term like blip? And it doesn't really explain on this chart very well. Levels are peak RMS equivalent. And what that's kind of implying is that you have a super processed signal that's so processed that the peak is not really any different than your average signal, which there's no audio signal that's like that. There's always audio signal where your average, this is always how audio is. Like, I don't really know how to display this. Actually, I was going to use this as like a cool tool. I remember now. So here's OBS and the meter. This is, again, a digital meter. And this part of the meter up here is peak. And this little dot that persists here is the the maximum peak that it has sampled since the last time it was reset. So just kind of sampling there, I think that will just kind of stay there. Oh, there it went away. So maybe after like a minute or so, it'll eventually go to the latest top value or something like that. So I like that. That's your typical peak meter, and it's great, like I mentioned, in digital world. And I'm having it peak at around -5 dB. That's arbitrary. This is an arbitrary value I picked. I was like, I'll just have peak around here. Now, I do have processed audio. I have an analog processor that is working okay. I don't know if I have it tuned great, but it's basically cutting out the noise, and it's leveling out my speech, because sometimes I like to talk quiet, and other times I'll just randomly talk loud. So I like to have something that follows my voice around, making sure that you can hear pretty much everything. Sometimes when I talk too quietly, the noise gate drops me out, so I have to talk at least above a certain level so that the noise gate doesn't think my level is just noise. I'm not going to go into all that detail, but my estimate of where I'm talking, I'm probably peaking in real life. This is just an estimate. I'm probably peaking around 70. That's my guess. Probably around 70 dB. And my average signal, so this little guy that's floating around here, I don't actually know if it's an average in terms of RMS or if it's a loudness unit, because that's becoming more popular nowadays. But it's definitely something. And if I make myself louder for a longer period of time, since RMS is based on time, you'll see the value go up. So RMS is pretty good at giving you a rough idea of how loud something is, but since it doesn't take into account like human perception, we don't hear low frequencies as well as we hear high frequencies. But some people can't hear ultra, super high frequencies. Those are not technical terms, but there's reasons to add weighting to stuff. So, but yeah, I would estimate I'm peaking, let's just say 70 dB. I'm peaking, and then my average value is, since it's real life, if I'm peaking around 70, maybe my average value is like around 50. And so already we have like a huge discrepancy. Like on average, my level is like, that's what it looks like on this meter. Like it's about 20 dB from peak to average, roughly, very roughly. So if I'm peaking around 70, that means my average is around 50. And that would mean my noise floor would be 15 below that. So already, like this gives like the impression that the live sound environment is that's the idea. That's the ideal, is that your environment that you're listening is perfect. That's why headphones are used a lot, because there's no real affectation of the sound between the speaker and you. But the reality is, like, there is noise in the background, and maybe my average voice is just getting just above, the fan noise from my computer. So maybe I have to speak up once in a while, and I'm peaking around 80. So anyway, so sort of my normal level. I don't ever talk louder than 100 dB, but let's say, that would be this would be my headroom, is between basically 80 and infinity. For live sound, it'd be, your headroom would be, whatever the sound pressure level is at your peak value to infinity. So have fun with that. And then a microphone is the first thing that your sound is going to probably run into. It does have a maximum. A lot of these are really tough. They could take all kinds of stuff and they'll sound just fine. But yeah, 130, like you could probably put a microphone, like I wouldn't recommend doing this, but putting a microphone next to a jet plane, it would be able to get the sound of the jet plane roughly. But it might be kind of distorted. So assuming that my level is actually around 80 dB sound pressure level and not here, this microphone can definitely pick up my sound. Just going on to this next section here, if you are working in 24-bit digital audio world, what they completely skip over here is the conversion from your microphone to your digital audio, but that's audio engineer job, I guess. And this is where they start using the alignment level. So if you set your, and it's so, this is a super big critique. I know there's already a citation needed here, but like, why just straight up say alignment level is an anchor point 9 dB below the nominal level when this chart right here has your alignment level? So is it saying that like plus 9 dB is your nominal level, and then the headroom above your nominal level would be something? And it doesn't even define what nominal level would be. It's just ridiculous because it's like, well, actually, you know, my thing is around here. So what I think what it's trying to convey here is that it looks like this peak headroom value before the distortion is about plus 24 above some arbitrary value. And as we see over here in OBS, basically, yes, here's the absolute maximum the OBS can handle, and then my average value is down here about 24 dB below that. But this is where we're just going back. All the different levels, freaking confusing. RMS versus peak. So what it's really what I think it's trying to say here is that your RMS level, wherever you want, like let's maybe say, let's give it like, be very forgiving. We're recording a very loud drum set. It makes 100 dB SPL from the snare drum. So we set that at, we use a microphone that can handle that. Good. This is, the more that I think about this, the more ridiculous this is. Like, that there is such a thing as an alignment level that perfectly matches a microphone. There are certain, okay, so I think the reason that they're getting into this much arbitrary detail is because there actually are standards that are based on this kind of stuff. They are based on 100 dB SPL at 1K is, you know, this value when you use a conductive, you know, whatever the parameters of the standard specification are. That's a real thing. There are, you know, EBU standards that, you know, they got to figure out something, and they got to figure out some arbitrary value. So 24 is generally the arbitrary value for most stuff. Like if I'm trying to make two different systems work together, I want to make sure that the top 24 dB are roughly gonna be good. Meaning, you know, hey, here's my average value. I want to make sure I am accurately capturing that in the receiving system. And so if I had to guess, you know, here's my average value. If I had to guess how much room, you know, do I need to ensure that any possible signal, whether it's processed or not, might come in clean on my end, I'll go with 24. You know, here's my average level. Above that, 24 dB. But are you talking about I'll set it on average 24 dB, or will I set it peak 24 dB? Those are two different things. So the world of digital, generally, since digital does do, like, peak does have a meaning that's consistent. This sample has this many, you know, has this value. It's the maximum sample, you know, it's the maximum value of the sample or whatever. the general rule of thumb with digital is establish a system such that you never really go above full scale, which is your absolute maximum. So if we kind of use that, what we might say is, what is the absolute maximum value of the thing I'm recording? So if I'm hitting if I'm recording a snare drum and on average it's 100 dB SPL, but the peaks are constantly hitting up here because it's a snare drum, it's got a ton of peaks. Maybe the peaks are going all the way up to 130. And maybe the microphone, it kind of clips there. Maybe you're like hitting it super hard and I'm at the absolute maximum of the microphone. I'm not gonna be like, well, that microphone and that snare drum are really loud, but I better make sure my alignment level lines up. And it's just constantly clipping into the digital system. This is what I'm getting at, is like, let's say you're just recording something that's loud and it sounds good. You don't want to like ruin it by letting it like just hit the digital system constantly. Now you can let some systems clip out and they sound pretty cool, and that's different than I want to perfectly capture the snare drum sound. This is implying that this master recording couldn't possibly handle the output from this microphone, when in reality it's like, well, yeah, it could. You're just shifting up the noise floor, but nobody could possibly ever hear the difference between 130 dB snare drum and the quietest possible sound. Like, I just don't really see, like, I get the idea of losing headroom as you go down the production line. I kind of get that idea, but at the same time, it's like, there's really no point in that, because who's going to be listening in their speaker system at 130 dB and be like, man, I wish I could hear that 40 dB crowd noise better? Nobody is going to. So it's just weird to see, everything is aligned thusly. Going back to my example of my voice is peaking around 80, so maybe I would, I'm only using the microphone's 80 dB or so of headroom. That's fine. I'm not going to tune that to be at negative 20, is what I'm saying. Like, my peak level right now is not at negative 20. And I'm not going to mix that such that when you play it back, it's at, something way down here. Like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm really trying to say with this. All I'm saying is that at first the stuff can seem like it's helpful and you might be kind of starting to get it. And then the more you look into a lot of stuff, you're just like, damn, this is confusing. This is confusing as fuck. And so I wouldn't say, take this as gospel that the alignment level must match 0 dB, which is 24 dB below, on a 100 dB SPL. It's like, this is a little, to say that the microphone has 100 dB SPL that matches live sound 100 dB SPL is a little misleading. But it gives the idea that dB to dB comparison can work if you're talking about level, sound pressure level, analog level. If you're trying to compare it to power, how much power do I need to drive a speaker system? That's more confusing. It's even more confusing. So I guess the main takeaway here is, don't feel bad if this stuff is confusing. Don't feel bad if you look at these meters and you're like, I see colors, but I don't really get it. And like this red does not mean not available. All this is saying, if anything, this red here on this meter kind of correlates to this yellow area, and the 0 is kind of this red area. this yellow is maybe the green. I don't know. And then the green is also the green. And the noise would be somewhere below -60. That's why I paused there, just to let the meter kind of relax back and sample some noise. And the noise is below 60 whenever the noise gate is kicking in. So yeah, that's kind of my rant. And there's also some other confusing things if you try to like look into this. Root mean square, this is like a pretty well understood mathematical phenomenon or whatever. Also called the quadratic mean, which is kind of cool. But then the more you think about it, RMS is actually not that useful, because here's all the different formulas for calculating RMS based on an actual signal, and like, why don't you just focus on the peak? I guess what I'm saying is I'm a peakist when it comes to audio signals. As long as your peak signal is coming in nice and clear, you're gonna get, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, whatever your peak signal is actually what determines your alignment levels. There really is no such thing as like a set alignment level, because the idea of a peak signal is to know sample-wise like where your signal's at. And unless you're working with something that has an extreme peak to average value, like 30, which is like maybe like a piano or a acoustic guitar, specific kind of snare drum hit where you really do have a peak value that's like 30 dB above your average value. That's pretty rare. I guess what I'm trying to talk about here is like your average value does follow your peak value quite a bit. I mean, this is processed audio, but like it's just so much more useful to have your peak meter and then to mix things by ear. It can be useful to have a loudness meter and then mix things to match their loudness, but nobody is mixing to match their peak level. They're just recording to make sure that they capture all of the peaks and then mix so that the average value of the loudness sounds good. So, so yeah, all to say, headroom is relative, alignment levels are relative. This chart might be useful for measuring noise. That way you can have a consistent noise threshold. So I don't really mind comparing FM radio, because I work in radio a little bit, but I wouldn't say this is how you would align an FM radio signal, but it does have this 9 dB. That's like usually, but 9 dB is actually usually the difference between the peak and the average value of a processed radio signal. But other than that, nothing is 9 dB straight up. One thing I will share is 10 dB, negative 10 dB was the suggested value so if you were like in a 24-bit system, negative 10 from here would be plus 14 here. Yeah, that doesn't match. It's just like none of this shit matches at all. So I'm just getting stuck on this. And then I also wanted to go over here and like discuss how silly the decibel is, but really all it is just the power ratio versus the amplitude ratio. Just remembering that the decibel has those two different interpretations of the decibel, depending on whether you're talking about a power ratio or an amplitude ratio. That is what I'm trying to say. And all the different variations of decibels, depending on your reference value, it can drive somebody freaking crazy. But if you kind of hone in on the ones that matter, also dBu, the pro value, it's bullshit because it's based off of a 600 ohm load, which is like not used. It's like that's like a telephone standard. It's nuts, but they had to come up with something. This is what they came up with. It's been useful. And then here's the here's the chart for sound pressure levels. So like a military equipment gets up into the 150, 200 range. A trumpet is about 130. Like a trumpet right in your ear, about as loud as they can possibly play, 130. Threshold of pain, a little below that, it's 120. Right at your ear, risk of instantaneous noise-induced hearing loss, jet engine, all this. So if you need to record, people record trumpets. So this microphone, I think it does say something like maximum sound pressure level 130 or something. It's somewhere around there. And so yeah, it can convert 130. I mean, it's handy to use decibels to talk about stuff. But yeah, just when you're first trying to get into it, it's crazy. But yeah, I need a studio microphone capable of withstanding 130 dB, because I want to record this trumpet. And sorry, bro, if you record that trumpet and I set all your alignment levels, the whole top part of it's just going to be distorted when you play it back on a speaker system. I guess that is kind of what it's trying to say, is like loudspeaker systems, like just one speaker by itself, generally have a hard time reproducing very, very loud sounds and start to distort. But I mean, come on, it wouldn't distort on FM radio that much. It would just get turned down. I don't know. I can't stop ranting about this, so I've got to figure out some way to stop anyway. I do want to thank Ardour for giving us the options and putting this in here. I just wish it was like a little bit more clear what this meant. But I'm not going to worry about it too much. So, do I recommend Ardour 8? Yes, I sure do. Sorry, I completely ran out of energy to talk about anything else. So, Ardour is cool. I think there's one more thing I wanted to show with Ardour, but I can't remember how to load it. It's the routing grid thingy. So let me demonstrate. So let me say. Let's say I want to route the output. It's even called routing grid. It's just what I thought it was. Let's say I want to route the output of this to somewhere else. I can pick from this list here, or I can get creative and go to the routing grid. And the routing grid, this was a bad idea because there's not a whole lot of cool stuff here. Let me go to a different routing grid. Input, routing grid. Okay. So what the routing grid allows you to do is select different, it basically organizes all your stuff into different types. And this is also not a great, my brain is kind of all mushed out, so I can't think of like a good way to demonstrate the routing grid in like 2 dimensions. There's like a window for it. It's just so cool to see the routing grid. It's such a good idea. But now my brain can't like lock in on. I can't read things anymore because my brain broke because I was talking about decibels. So this is what I'm talking about. They're too confusing. Your brain just starts like melting as soon as you start thinking about it too much. And then you're like, screw this, I'm not going to get into audio. That's why nobody likes audio, because all the stuff that we use stinks. The meter bridge is cool too. You can select. It's just like, it looks nice. They've done a really good job making stuff look cool. Audio connections. Here we go. Audio connection manager. So let's say I wanted to get creative with like, just like even like straight up hardware routing. I don't even need tracks or anything. You can just like directly plug I/O on your hardware into it. You can do that. It lets you do that. And there's this grid of like, here's all the system inputs, here are all the system outputs. Completely ignore all the tracks that are there. You can also goof around with the tracks, and they're color-coded, which is great. So, like, yeah, here, if I want to route for some random reason directly the output of the track to the input of another track, you can do that. Most stuff is routed through buses, so you have tracks routed to output buses, which go to your master bus. And so if you have a bus when you have the tracks and you have your hardware with the tracks and you can map it and you can... So if I wanted to reroute all of the tracks in one fell swoop, I would just do... you have to unplug it first. But then you can do this and just like make an angle. Like that is so handy. Or if I want to like change, like, oh, I got them all plugged in backwards. Boom, I did it in like 2 seconds. I didn't have to like friggin' do anything. Just line them up, order that you want, connect input to output, and you can draw a line. If I need to reroute all of them to my ADAT. I don't know if I can do that very fast. Wait, I just did it. It's so good. I should have started with this. This is probably the coolest thing. And I think they've added it to a lot of DAWs because they were like, man, that's a good idea. We should do that. But it's been an Ardour the entire time. Like I started using Ardour over 10 years ago. Like Ardour 3 or something like that. Had it back then, if I'm remembering correctly. So there's like video, there's MIDI in here. But I'm too tired to talk about that. So let me just go back to OBS. I'm talking for way too long about this. So this is what my brain looks. This is what I look like when I have a fried brain. You're welcome. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. I do recommend Ardour. It's very good. Get the Melda Audio Free Effects plugin bundle and go to the... Here, let me show you. Let me show you. I think my key commands stopped working for some reason. If you go to Ardour... I don't remember where it is. I was so excited. Plugins. Get your VST plugins. Set them up here. I don't even know. You can enter more VST locations. I don't really remember. They do support audio units on Mac. That's if you hit the scan for plugins button, it just kind of goes and it finds them. You might have to like make sure they're installed first. It sounds like it's obvious, but you know, not everything in the world is obvious. So, anyway, have fun. Goodbye. Oh, I have to turn off the recording now. Stop recording.